Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm excited for another episode of Aviatrix Classics with my co-hosts, Dr. Jackie Boyd and Captain Jenny Beatty. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Captain Carole Hopson, the author of A Pair of Wings, a novel about the life of Bessie Coleman. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the literary aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Jackie and Jenny, welcome back.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And Carole Hopson, special welcome to you as our first guest. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You all, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for opening up your circle.
You've been in the circle since day one. You know that. And now you just are knocking it out of the park with this amazing book. Now, I would just want to talk a little bit, and Jenny's going to hold that book up there, A Pair of Wings, a novel by Carole Hopson with a beautiful new cover, compliments of Holt Publishing. So congratulations on that. I want to talk a little bit about that. But I also want to talk about why we picked this book when what we've been focusing on have been classics, quote unquote, books by our pioneering aviatrices who we wouldn't be able to interview. So we're digging through their source material to have the opportunity to talk about them in their words. But Bessie doesn't have a book in her own words. And we wanted to take the opportunity based on first and foremost, the beauty and incredible craftsmanship in terms of writing of this book, the fact that it is recently republished and out being read by an entirely new market, bringing Bessie into the homes of everybody across the country and hopefully the world, which is amazing. And also her place in our history. So I guess in terms of classics, we're talking about one of our classic pioneers who fits into the context of the women that we have been talking about. And we did not want to overlook her. So we're so grateful that you brought this book to us and so grateful to have you here. Now, one of the things that I think is amazing is that Bessie's story in some ways almost feels like a fairy tale, but it's also a story of hard work and perseverance. And I feel like this book is that too. It's almost a fairy tale, especially for people who aspire to be, traditionally published and go ahead and self-publish first. To have your book get picked up by a traditional publisher and put it in print again is an absolute fairy tale, but also a testament to your hard work and perseverance. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Girl, I love how you put that as fairy tale because, whoo, and sometimes it does feel a little Cinderella-ish. First of all, thank you for having me on. And Liz, from the very beginning when I wrote the book, you helped me to get it out there, and I'm just super grateful. And to Jenny, I had been to University of Virginia and to Columbia University, Ivy League school, never even heard Bessie Coleman's name, never even saw her in any textbook I had ever read. So at the end of Women in Aviation, Jenny gave me a gift, a coffee mug, and it had Bessie Coleman's picture on one side and 50 words, as I like to say, that changed my life forever on the other side. So I have great admiration and love for my sister Jenny from now until forever because she introduced me to Bessie Coleman. So I'll start with that. Fairy tale, oh my gosh, like I said, Cinderella. So I wanted to publish this book on June 15th, 2021, because it was 100 years to the day that Bessie Coleman earned her certificate in France in French. She was almost 2 years before Amelia. And what's stunning is that when my husband was trying to help me with the name of the book, we had, BC, like Bessie Coleman. So, BC means so much. And I I hesitated to put Amelia in the title because I didn't want Bessie to be defined by anyone else. Her story is a story of incredible tenacity, moxie, spirit, and as I love to say, the pursuit of one true thing. And she loved flying as much as she loved person, a lover in her life. It was the great love of her life. And so, she pursued a quest that took her across two continents, made her learn another language at an advanced age, and had her focus on things at a time before women in this country had earned the right to vote. So what she did was just absolutely positively extraordinary. And she did it, again, no shade, but she did it before Amelia. She did it before the Tuskegee Airmen. She did it before any other American, a
That's right.
civilian certificate. So she is, I love the context of fairy tale. She is, she is almost Wonder Woman like, right?
Mhm.
Marvel like. I often say that gorgeous uniform that she designed should have a cape. And the re-edit of the book, which I love the re-edit. It's cleaner, it's crisper, it's faster, it's a better read. And what my editor asked me one time when we were having a conversation, she said, "Hey, Carole, how did Bessie Coleman get the agency to design her own uniform in the 20s? How in the world did she come to do that?" And it was a stunning question. I had never thought about it, right? And so I'll just stop right there. But the fact that she could define herself led me to the conclusion that I'd had from the beginning, which is that she was incredibly internally driven, that the external politics, the Jim Crow laws of that day, when on the same page Bessie Coleman was performing and barnstorming, we were reading about lynchings. There was something that was internal to her spirit, to her soul, to her own, um, to the fiber, right, of her, literally the fiber of her body, that she said, I'm going to do this in spite of every single thing that exists.
And that definitely comes across on the page in my mind as I reread this, which was wonderful. And I know that you said it's a better read and it's a cleaner edit. I don't know if I noticed those things. I mean, I enjoyed it just as much the first time, but this time it was like revisiting. Anytime you come back to a story, you start to notice new things. And so, just for the writers out there, very briefly, who have these dreams of getting a book, that they self-published into the hands of a traditional publisher, can you just tell us how you got that done?
Got it. So here's what I say. The numbers are staggering, right? 4 million people write books every year. 4,000 people get agent representation, and of those numbers, probably about 10 to 15%, something like that, get published, right? But
Mhm.
I know if you believe in what you're writing about, you will pursue it to the ends. Don't give up. Make a strategy. What works for you? How can you focus on what it is of the moment? Yes, yes, yes. Nobody wants to hear that. But of the moment, not what's trending, but what's important to you. And does what's important to you fit any trend? So, for example, if writers out there are writing about our pioneers, what about the pioneer spirit drives the work that you're doing so much so that it fits into some particular hook or trend?
Yeah.
Then go out there and look for every book, every single book or journal that's focused on something that you like to do. So let's say, for example, I'm just looking across at my bookshelf right now. So there's The Warmth of Other Suns that Isabel Wilkerson wrote, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, in just a moment. But what about the historical pursuit that fits this moment. Because guess what? What's old is new again. So if you're writing about one of the pioneers, or you're writing about something that's futuristic, whatever it is that you're writing about, how does that fit into this moment? Then go find yourself a publisher that that's written about some topic that you've written about, and then write them a query letter. Your query letter, please make it 1 page. Don't make it 2, don't make it 3, make it 1 page. Get your mentors, get your Jennies, get your Jackies, get your Liz's. I know there's nobody out there like those 3, but go get yourself, I'm telling you the truth, ladies, nobody out there. Go get yourself a mentor who will read that and give you some real criticism, some real critique. And don't be afraid of the word criticism, but get you some real critique in there. And you say, you've gone on about yourself too much. Make it 1 paragraph about you. Listen, I've lived 20 lives. I'm like the cat, okay? The cat with 9 lives. But I have a graph that talks about me. I have 2 graphs that talk about Bessie. And so when my query letter came to be, I had 1, 2, 3, I have 4 paragraphs. That was it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I ended it with gratitude, Carole. I put my phone number, I put my email, I put my, the smoke signal that the pigeon could find. Make sure that that's right. I know this is a stupid thing, but don't put your phone number in there wrong. I'm sorry. I just got to tell you. I know it's funny, right? But I got a resume from a young woman the other day, and she misspelled her email, and I knew that it was a misspelling, so I called her on it. Make sure that there's not a typo. Make sure that it's clear. Make sure that your publisher, who you've now targeted, can't say no. And if they do, write them again. Write them again. Write them again. Had I wrote in the beginning maybe 400 queries.
Wow. Wow.
But
Yeah.
every no leads me closer to a yes. Don't be afraid of the no's. Just pinpoint closer.
Well, congratulations on your success. And I'm so, you know how over the moon I am. Happy for you that this is reaching the audience that it will reach through this venue. Now,
Part of,
you meant, what's that?
you're part of that story.
Well, a very tiny part, and I'm excited to just be in your presence. That's all. I'm a huge fangirl. So you mentioned that you have whatever 20 lives, 100 lives, but let's talk about your pilot life. So I know that not only was the mug that Jenny gave you and your friendship with her an inspiration for this book, but also for your own journey. So tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, I had no idea that Bessie Coleman had walked this planet, right, 100 years before I did. And I was just hell bent on making sure that I didn't leave the planet before I let other people know who she was. So, there was a stamp, right, in 1995. I lived very close to a trauma hospital. Evidently, there must have been some trauma, right?
Oh.
So, God bless. Anyway, there was that stamp in 1995. But here's what I learned along the way, my pilot life. I don't think that we walk this journey alone. And Jenny certainly has been bud and mentor to me, sister and mentor to me for over 20 years. And what I'd like to do in my own pilot life is demonstrate. Just show up, just be there and let people know that I'm here, I did it, you can do it. And the more that we work on that, the better our flight decks become. So I started the Jet Black Foundation, and our goal is to send 100 Black women to flight school by the year 2035. So it's probably a $30 million raise, and that's $3 million a year. I believe, and I've said this to you before, Liz, I know you've heard this, Jackie, and Jenny, you certainly have heard this, that you can have it all, you can't have it all easily at the same time.
Mm.
And, you can't eat your apple the entire thing, right? You can eat it one bite at a time. So $3 million a year, every year for a decade is doable. Who knows? Maybe even speed that trajectory up. But it's like becoming a pilot. It takes time, it takes money, It takes all sorts of resources, and it takes friends. Nobody I've ever met has done it by themselves.
I want to hear from Jenny about this friendship too. Why don't you give us a little background from your perspective?
Sure. Well, um, just a little bit about how I ended up at the Women in Aviation Conference. And that's where I met Jackie at the very first one that I attended in 1992. And when I was a brand new airline pilot myself, and I figured out right away that there were not that many. There were other airline pilots there, which was great. They were mentors to me and role models for me. Um, but I knew that I could also be there as a role model. And so thereafter, I always was there in uniform, willing to speak to other women to encourage them that here I am wearing this uniform. You can be here wearing this uniform, flying these aircraft, same as me. I'll never forget meeting Carole at the Nashville Women in Aviation Conference, because what I identified immediately in Carole, first of all, obviously her astounding intellect, but her drive and determination. You know, I meet plenty of young people and all sorts of people who say they want to fly, but I could tell immediately that Carole was determined and she had a plan. And I could tell she's going to make that happen for herself. No question in my mind. And what I also know, so speaking of being a role model and in my uniform, I know that it really helps to see someone who looks like you. So in the course of the conference, when I saw that mug, I had to get that for Carole, because all we were at that conference were a bunch of white women. I'm sorry. I don't remember any other black women there that year.
There weren't any, honey.
And the numbers are so few. I can go into the numbers later. They're tiny. They're tiny today, 25 years later. And I knew that having an image that Carole could look at could help inspire her and motivate her further. She's mentioned it in other interviews, but I also laid her center a full page advertisement that was put out by UPS in 1995, showing Patrice Clark Washington, who was one of the very first Black women to be an airline pilot for UPS, and she was the first captain. Because I remember Carole telling me she believed she could do this. Again, Carole was determined she was going to do this. But she said her family wasn't sure. And I know that feeling of family members who they're just afraid that you're overreaching and they're afraid that you might trip and fall and not make it to your goal. So it was out of caring for her, not out of trying to hold her back, but out of caring for her. And so I sent her this so she could show her family, look, it is possible. Someone else has done it. I can do it. So, and I have to say, I can't finish without saying that Carole has also been a mentor and dear friend to me, and a mentor in so many ways through the years. And she's so right about not being able to do it all. She's can talk about how her career, it took its twists and turns, as it does for so many of us, but she never lost sight of her goal, and she made her goal as a United Airlines captain. I could not be more happy and proud.
I know you so much you said in there. I mean, sometimes especially those of us who see aviation as our big life dream, sometimes we have to make our own family, and that's what this community is all about. The women in aviation community, the Sisters of the Size community. Like, we have so many people there where we can find our own family to support us through this journey. That's a beautiful story.
So wait, I have to share this. So that picture that Jenny sent me, I put it up on my refrigerator. And I'm gonna say a decade, it curled at the corner, the curl. I have two boys, honey. We changed refrigerators, and it made it to two or three of my refrigerators.
That's so
So,
great.
but I want to share one other thing. So my husband's always, always, always been a supporter. He's always, always, always been there. But Jenny's right. There are a lot of people who are in the background, and they say, not necessarily like my intimate family, but there are a lot of people who said, wait a minute, you are overreaching. That's just silly. You're too old for that. Or, there's nobody else there. But that picture of Patrice Clark Washington, Jenny's right. I mean, that was inspiration every day. Every day I went into the fridge. I have two boys. That was like, that's 50 times a day. Forcing, right? And I'd love to hear that, because I don't know that I've ever heard Jenny tell me that story, about how when she bought the mug. And I have a question for you, Jenny. So when was it? I thought we met like in the line. Remember way back in the day, Women in Aviation had the hotel over here and the conference over here. So you kind of got on the van, or you got on the bus, and you stood in the line. And in those moments, you had conversations with other women. Hey, what support host do you use? What do you eat? How do you keep your skin moisturized? Like stuff like that. But important stuff, right? How did you get to American? Where is the next base that's going to be opened up for the regional? How can I keep my family in the foreground when, doggone it, like I just finished yesterday, a 4-day at 10 o'clock at night with 7 legs and 7,000 miles and 1,500 people? How do you do that? Right? So you would be standing there in the line waiting for the darn bus, but at that moment you were having conversations. I think that's where we met, like standing in the bus line.
I don't remember it being in a bus line. I think it was in the inside the buildings. So I don't remember the exact moment, but you were beautifully dressed in a beautiful business suit, which was what everybody recommended. And I remember later, many years later, you told me, oh, you were embarrassed that it wasn't a navy blue business suit, but when you were at the conference, you observed and you're like, oh, okay, now I know for next year. But again, you uh, obviously, because of you already being an executive for multinational companies, I mean, and being a little bit older, you were not an 18, 20-year-old, you were 34. So you knew your way around the world, and you knew your way around the business world, and you were put together, polished, and just, again, you had your act together in a way that 20-year-olds just don't. But also you knew this was daunting, and here you were at the place to meet the people and to learn exactly how to get to where you want to go. So you're someone who does your homework, and you are making your path and forging your path. And again, can I jump into the book?
Do it. Yeah.
I can't think of anyone else that could have written this book, because this is you, the story of Bessie, who finds the mentors, finds the path, and finds out every little different thing that you have to do to make it happen for yourself, including learning French. And you went to France. You read all these newspapers. And when I mean you're the best person who could have possibly written this book, you're the only one who could have written this book, because you have a degree in journalism. You read all these newspapers to research her story. And as a Black woman, you immersed yourself in what was the world like for Black people at that time. And you bringing that perspective and making sure that wasn't just a veneer of the story, which I think it could have been or would have been written by someone who was white. It's integral to the story that her background and the Chicago, and why people migrated north to Chicago, and it's throughout the book. It's an integral part of the book, and you bring that. And I know you don't talk about it publicly. You've had a serious injury in an accident. It wasn't an airplane accident, but you know what it's like to be physically very injured. And so that visceral opening of your book, you bring that. And I saw your mother in Bessie's mother.
Oh my goodness. This is wonderful. Thank you, Jenny. So you've already touched on some things that are in the book. And Carole, while we still have you, because I know that you're on a tight timeline and you might not be able to stay with us the whole time, I want to make sure that we get to like the actual summary of this beautiful book that you made. You've got some overarching themes that I want to talk about if we have you. But can you kind of talk about Bessie's timeline?
Absolutely. First, I love me some Jenny.
We all love Jenny.
Good sister right there. But I will say this, Jenny. My mom, who passed 18 months ago, and Jenny and I like to say we're part of a club that nobody wants membership to, and that's when you lose your mother. And it's just, you feel like you're untethered. But I will tell you this: my mom would be thrilled that you said that she was anything like Bessie's mom, because my mom was. God, I love my mother, but she was never soft and pink. My mom was tough. Bessie's mother was a woman from the South who had been born into, and I'll hop right into the book. Bessie's mother had been born into slavery in Texas. So when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Texas held slaves another 2 years. So her mother went from, we're not exactly sure the age because no one kept precise records. From age 5 to 7 is what we think it was. So by the time her mother was released from bondage, her mother was in second grade. But her mother wasn't in second grade because blacks didn't learn to read then. So if you think about a second grader, and if you think about a little girl who comes skipping home from school, this is the same age of the woman who was released from bondage, who gives birth to Bessie Coleman. Her father, George Coleman, was a sharecropper. He was black and Native American, and he was almost like a frontiersman, right? He was a guy who built a house with his own hands, who moved his family from Atlanta, Texas to Waxahachie, Texas. Even after 15 years, I still mess up the name. Anyway, he moves his family there because he believes that there's better. And so when he says to his wife, hey, let's go to Oklahoma. So now here comes the history. The Homesteading Act of the mid 1800s said, listen, you can walk this area and it becomes yours. And that is homesteading. And then you own that land. So when he goes to do that, there's not much land left. And so Bessie's mother says to him, I imagine, if you do this, you'll be putting all of us into, what became Tornado Alley. And I can't go with you. I can't make one more trip to another desolation for a promise of better. I have to stay here and raise these 4 girls. And that was the last kind of, if you were to look at a family tree, the last arm of the tree would have been Bessie Coleman's 3 younger sisters and she. The others were older brothers and sisters who had moved out. And so begins the chronology. But we don't start there. We start with the terrible accident that Coleman has in 1923. And it's so funny. There was a woman named Michelle Martin who interviewed me for NPR. She said, it's kind of a bummer that you start right there.
I know. I listened to that interview and I thought that was interesting.
I said, well, it's a movie. And we start where the journey begins in terms of reflection, right? So Jenny brought it up. I had a terrible accident. I was a pedestrian, was hit by a car when I was 16.
Oh
And
my
it
goodness.
was devastating. It was the summer before I went to college. And it's so funny because everybody thinks of me these days, because of the book, as a late bloomer. But I was an early bloomer. I went to college earlier. Everything was early. And then I didn't think I could become an airline pilot. It was ages before I was able to even figure out how to get to do this, right? And so Jenny's part of that story. But after that car accident, I was able to reflect. Now, I was only reflecting on 16 years, but I could only imagine that that helped Bessie to sit down and gather her thoughts. How do I get from here, where I am broken, literally and physically, to there, which is next? Do I cave? Do I just accept a lot of women, black women, early 20th century? Do I just give up? How do I start from the beginning? And Jenny used a very key word that has been something that I've learned from Bessie, which is strategy. How do I strategically get myself out this damn hole? And how am I going to build back? and build better. And I think in history, what Bessie Coleman, and I said this to you before, Liz, on the broadcast that you did before, I think what Bessie Coleman doesn't get credit for is the fact that in history, if you look back on some of our first aviators, right? Male, female, black, white, what she doesn't get credit for in history is being a strategic and a critical thinker. So what do I mean by that? Here's a complex problem with so many different aspects. She's able to take that problem apart and solve each one of the problems and then get to a solution, and that solution moves it further. The book opens with that accident, and then that's part one. It's almost like a prequel. Was I thinking movie? Then there's the very first part, which is coming to Chicago. How does a young woman come to a different city and come into her own, all on her own? We've talked about no woman is an island, right? So she gets to Chicago, she becomes a man's manicurist. That's a perfect place historically and fictionally for her to meet the two men who influenced her life profoundly and who became part of her support system. And that's Jesse Binga, who became her lover, the first black banker in Chicago. And he was a badass. I mean, he was fine. He had a sidearm, right? He managed money. He became a self-made millionaire in the teens. He was all fire. And then another man who was almost his polar opposite, right? And that's Robert Abbott, who started the Chicago Defender. And in many ways, the Chicago Defender is both a character in the book as well as the chronicle of her career. And those two men helped her to get over to France. And then not just the first time, because unlike so many, when she came back to the U.S., it wasn't like somebody said, okay, here's the airmail job that you've been waiting for. So she was forced to critically think, what do I do now? Okay, I have to go back over to France, to Berlin, to Amsterdam to learn how to become a stunt pilot. But what does that mean? So she winds up going back over there and she meets these dog fighters from the First World War who become her instructors. Then she's got to take that instruction and turn those into a barnstorming show. What? Where is the cape? It's not at the dry cleaners. It's being made for this city and that city and the next. She is astounding in her ability to reinvent herself. We call it pivoting, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's astounding in her ability to reinvent in a climate that constantly, like I talked about, Jenny, give me that picture and go into the refrigerator 50 times. And every time she goes to the well, it's a reminder of who she isn't. It's a reminder of who she shouldn't. It's a reminder of who she should not be. And yet, she digs down deep. The agency, the moxie, the chutzpah. God damn, she's a Jackie Boyd who's doing stuff before other people are doing it. She is the person, I remember meeting Jenny and thinking, oh gosh, she's so cute, she's so little, right? And I remember thinking, that's what people think about me. Oh, she's so little. I don't have to carry the airplane. I just gotta fly it, right? So again and again, she goes to this personal well to establish herself, to think of who I am going to be. And then later, the hallmark of a talisman, the hallmark of a leader is a person who then makes the way for other people. So she actually opens a school, Coleman Aeronautics. And then so many people wanted to do what she was doing but couldn't. And then she finds a man who sells more tires. He's a black man who works for Coast Tire and Rubber. He sell so many tires. Why? Because the roads weren't paved. Why? Because black people were redlined and they bought cars to show their new affluence. And yes, it wasn't the best investment, but damn it, it was new and it was fabulous. And they bought cars to go from one place to the other. So in 1908, when the first car, the first automobile rolls off the assembly line, Henry Ford creates the way for Americans to move about the planet, and he changes the way we move about the planet forever, because the first automobile from the assembly line is cheaper than a handmade automobile. And I like to say that the first Ford taught us to move about the planet forever, move about the country forever, and the 737, which Jenny flies, that showed us how to move around the planet forever. And so these were very pivotal moments in history that Bessie Coleman literally inserts herself to. And I say insert twice because she has to insert herself and then insert herself again. Because as a black woman, she's not only like breaking the glass ceiling, she's shattering the sky. Move over, y'all, because here I come. And then we set up for the third part of the book. And the third part of the book is learning how to fly in France. And then she comes back. And again, she does that 2 times, going back and forth to Europe. And then she comes back and barnstorms all across the country. And then we come to Comeback, which is the 5th and the final part of the book. And I strategically named them parts. Miniseries. Movie. The 5th part is Comeback. So she comes all the way back to when the accident happened. And then we find out, basically how it was that she began to agency to design crowds of 20,000 people. I'm just trying to sell 20,000 books, but yet 20,000 people show up.
There's so much that you just talked about that obviously plays in this period of history, and so we've kind of had our heads in this. Things like the transportation of the time and the comparisons between the development of the automobile and how people learned about mechanics and how to an engine and how a vehicle runs and how they used that knowledge when they came to aircraft. We talked about the railroads because obviously these are the things that are connecting people between cities at the time, and Jackie has a rich connection to that history that she's shared with us as well. And then there's the newspapers. I mean, we do see this, but I want to thank you for introducing me to this history of the Black newspaper, and in particular the way that you used it as a device in the story to give Bessie the awareness, the visibility on what was going on in the world around her, so that she could then, as the narrator of the story, give us the historical context. And you mentioned it sort of in your opening about the severe, like, it's one thing to talk about how there was discrimination and segregation and those kinds of things. It's another to confront the reality of the kinds of things that were being reported in the newspaper, and to have that in your world, to know that people like you are being killed, being lynched just for being like you, and to come up against that wall and try and climb over it or go through it. I think it was very important that you included that, as in not just once, but you kept it fresh in our minds throughout the story, that this is what Bessie was up against. It wasn't just you weren't allowed to drink out of the same water fountain. That was the least of our problems. And so the fact that she was able to achieve the things that she was able to achieve against this backdrop was very craftful for you as a writer to use to help keep that fresh in our minds. And you talk about the Chicago Defender a little bit, because I know you kind of liken it to the social media of the day.
Well, thank you for that. And you, as usual, as you do, you encapsulate so much. So again, I use that example of going to the refrigerator each time. So the reason why the Chicago Defender is a character in the book, just as the biplane is a character in the book, is that my first agent, and I want to go back to something else that you talked about in the beginning for writers who want a little bit of encouragement in terms of self-publishing or in terms of how you get to a major publisher. So I had an agent in the very beginning, Marie Brown, a lovely, wonderful woman. We were at lunch and she lived in Harlem. And I used to say, Marie had me come and meet with her for lunch at these Harlem haunts. And she would give me rewrite after rewrite. My agent, who was actually an awesome editor, and she would say to me, Carole, you use a newspaper here and there, but I want you to use that newspaper as you would take a hanger and put a dress on it. So the dress hangs on a hanger. We see the dress, we don't even realize it's hanging on a hanger. So I use the newspaper as a way to teach history of the day without beating you over the head with history, a history lesson. Who wants that? That's boring. So that the use of literally the headlines was Marie saying to me, you have to give this book some heft. It has to have historical significance and relevance. And so in doing that, newspaper became part of the characterization or a character in the novel. But they were true, right? And so, for example, there's a character in the book, I'll just pick him out for a minute, Hash. He becomes a character in the barber shop because I want you to know what it's like for Black men who were incarcerated during that day. So people look at Black families and they were like, oh, well, where are all the Black men? Well, shit, they were incarcerated. Why? Because if you walked on the wrong side of the street, now don't get me wrong, and I use something very, very significant. So Hash, kills a man in a bar fight, but I use that specifically because he murders another Black man, but he's out in a couple years, and I use that as a device. Had he murdered or married a white woman or murdered a white man, he would have been incarcerated forever. But why?
If he was still alive, yeah.
Still alive.
Yeah.
But exactly. But I wanted you to understand what incarceration did to Black families and why that becomes something that impacts Black families for the next 200 years. How is it that people even survive that time? And yet, again, Bessie is able to do what she did. So let me go back. So I brought up Marie for a reason. So then COVID happens, right? Everybody's sick. Publishing does industries like literally go into the chill. They just freezer. And so again, I had that date in my mind. I wanted the book published by that date, and we were unable to continue. But once that story was out in the world, and I feel like people know Bessie Coleman's story, it's so compelling that we were able to sell 10,000 books from my kitchen table. So I want to go back to the story, but I just thought it was a great intercession to tell people, be hopeful. Don't stop writing your book. If you have something to talk about it and put it out there on the planet. But okay, I digress. Let's go back to the story. So I would just say, to answer your question, Liz, the reason why I wanted to make what and how the environment was that Bessie came of age, also a character in the book, was I wanted you to see how she persevered, how she triumphed over obstacles. And when you think about today, what our numbers are in aviation, Jenny talks to me about this all the time, and I quote her on this. So our numbers are in the single digits in terms of women in aviation today in this country. And yet in India, they're double digit, 15, 16%. And I loved it. Jenny taught me that. Again, that's a mentor saying, you have to put this in context. And the context is, if you go back 100 years from today, and you look at what our numbers were in aviation, and then let's just advance, 50 years, and then today, our numbers, they really haven't changed that much in 30 years. And let me step back even further. So at the crux of this book, if you look at Margot Shetterly's book, Hidden Figures, and you were to say, I would love for somebody to compare it to A Pair of Wings. At the crux of her book is two things, two seemingly incompatible things: the space race and the civil rights race.
Mm-hmm.
And this book is focused on two seemingly incompatible things, and that is the dawn of aviation and the dawn of the Great Migration. As African Americans came from the agricultural South to the industrial revolution of the North. And Woodrow Wilson promised to keep us out of World War One. But at the same time, we were building things all over the United States. Gary, Indiana, Massachusetts, um, uh, New Jersey. We were building things, parts for locomotives, uniforms, boots, ammunition, whips. We were building things for war. And who better to build those things than Black people from the South who had built the country? And so as people, and you talked about the newspaper and Black newspapers. So Black newspapers, and I think I said it wrong in the beginning. I said they were read 6 times before they became birdcage liner. Black people would read the paper, and then Pullman porters. Jackie talked about, you talked about Jackie and trains. So trains were very pivotal to the Great Migration. My family's history from North Carolina brought my family from the East Coast and the Mid-Atlantic states north to New York City, to Philadelphia, right? Philadelphia and New York City, because the train lines ran from north to south and south to north. And so Black people who wound up in Chicago were coming from Mississippi, from Alabama, from Georgia. If their family had enough stamina, they made it out west because the train lines had begun to be robust from Chicago to the West Coast. And it was those train lines that brought people from the South to the North. And that's why when you look at families in Detroit and Gary, a lot of them are from Alabama and Mississippi. When you look at families from Philadelphia and New York, their families like mine come from Virginia and North Carolina.
Jackie, I want to bring you into this because you haven't had a chance to talk yet, and you're always such an insightful co-host on this. But before I do, I just wanted to mention, in the context of the book being relevant today, I feel like you were talking about making sure that it's relevant to readers today, and what's going to sell and those kinds of things. I feel like the sad, truth is that the echoes of the culture that were happening at the time, we can feel those echoes in the past 5 to 10 years. And so it remains relevant in the most unfortunate ways as well. So Jackie, you've been sitting there very patiently and quietly. What do you want to talk about? What do you have for Carole, or what comments do you have on?
I went back and read the first book, and I reviewed that for the 99s magazine. And I think part of it, and that was 3 years ago. I looked at the date, and it was in the September-October 2021 issue of the magazine. And
That's
I look
cool.
at this as an academic. When I really put the push on to get into my own writing, belonged to several writers groups, and in the late 90s, the term when you published on your own was vanity publishing.
Oh, that's right. I
And
forgot that, Jackie.
I hated the term, but it was
Of
so
course.
difficult to break into any of the big league publishers. But now we're going through a real renaissance of memoirs, women like me who learned to fly in the 70s. I think part of it is the statute of limitations on stupidity for some of those things we did in airplanes has run out, so no one can, but the term.
And the statute of limitations that other stupid people said and did to you. Talking about those things.
But my
You said it.
problem with the first book when it said a novel. And I thought, if it's a true story, tell me the truth. And I am a big one on bibliographies and references. It's just who I am when I look at a book. And
Got it.
I said it in the review 3 years ago, and I say it now. You changed my mindset on a fictionalized
Hot dog.
approach to a factual story. And I think what I enjoyed
Go
so
ahead, girl.
much about the second iteration of this book, your writing is what carries it. Someone with less talent with a written word wouldn't have been able to take Bessie's true story and make it be a novel, a fictionalized approach. Your writing is absolutely extraordinary. It it takes this,
Thank you.
you bring about who she was, not just what she did. And I think that
Go ahead, girl. Dang. That was insightful, didn't you, Liz?
that's what
I told
that's
you
what
she's insightful.
carries this over for me. And I am so pleased that it's come out again. Although I love both editions. I do think the new one, it shows your thoughtfulness in listening to people's reactions and actions. Having an agent who will tell you what it is you need to know is not always an easy thing.
Tell you the truth.
But the differences in the approach show, but it's still very much who Bessie was. That determination, that persistence, her approach to life. And I really think it carries over, even if it wouldn't have been aviation, her approach to how she
Yeah.
did what she did just comes across so beautifully in this book. So, thank you for changing an old woman's
Oh my.
approach to reading.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Oh, let me say something because we're coming up on an hour, and I wanted to thank Jenny for reading the early copies, right? Because again, mentor, friend, and I remember Jenny saying to me, "Jesus, Carole, I know you were a police reporter, but dang, go on, the beginning is just violent." I said, "Jenny, it's a plane crash." Right, but so but again, listening and really focusing on what people who love you tell you, right? Because they're going to tell you the truth. But Jackie, thank you for so much insight, and I will share this with you. I wanted to write a biography. I wanted to take Doris Rich's book, because Doris Rich's book was seminal, and it becomes the only Jenny reaches back to Shay, and it becomes right. I said, dang, going at Doris Rich used all the good words. Queen, Bess, Daredevil, Aviator. Oh my God. She used every daggone right, but, and no buts. It was extraordinary. But the problem was, I don't know if my neighbor next door would pick it up and read it and be like, oh my gosh, look what time it is. I haven't made dinner. Look what time it is. I missed my train. Oh my gosh, I got to flip over because I'm in the sun and now I'm sunburned on the front. I don't know that it was a page turner to everybody. So the fiction, Jackie, the fiction was to tie together the events of her life. For example, we know that Robert Abbott was a big fan of hers, but what were their conversations?
Right.
We know that she meets Anton Fokker, of Fokker Aviation, who created the synchronization gear, who people call the interrupter gear, right? So he changes the course of the war. He changes the Great War. Had it not been for Anton Fokker and the year of Fokker fodder, 1915, and what happened was he came to the Americans with the technology and said, look, I got something. I'm going to take a camshaft and I'm going to move a bullet in between the rotating arcs of a propeller. Would you all like to have it? Here's how much it costs. And the Americans said, oh, that's too much money. You got beat it, Dutchman. So he goes over to the Germans and sells this technology, emerging technology, to the Germans. 1915 becomes a year where German airplanes shoot Allied airplanes, the Brits, the French, we finally joined in 16. Just shoots everybody out the air. Had it not been for diplomacy, we probably would have been speaking German. Now that's history. Now, doggone it, I had to learn it. Now, how do I teach it to my reader without bashing them over the head about the Great War, which wasn't even called World War I until we had World War II?
Right.
How do I do that? Well, how does Bessie do it? She uses newspapers. And let me just share one more thing with you. Woo! Every interaction she has, at the end of it, there's a goodbye. There's a not a farewell, there's a goodbye. I don't have a goodbye with Jenny. I can call her or text her. She texted me. She's like, Carole, hurry up and get to this meeting. Get to this important conversation. See, we have cell phones. We have ways to connect. When Bessie's father leaves, it's a goodbye. When Bessie leaves to go overseas, it's a goodbye to her lover. When she comes back, it's not like they reunite and she sends him a text, hey, baby, I'm back. Right? I mean, it's like, she got to pick up on this new life. When she goes over to France and learns how to fly from a French instructor, the quadrones, they made over 10,000 airplanes for the war effort. When she leaves him, her instructor, we all know how important that good instructor is to you, to your flying, but to your life. When she leaves him, it's not farewell, it's goodbye. When she goes over to Germany and a German badass teaches her, Max Immelman turns, what? In a 1915, what? It's not see you later, it's goodbye. Good God. How is it that one keeps taking these hits? How do you just keep taking hits? And yet, the next day you get up and you go and you move that boulder one more inch. Who was that person? And guess what? She's in every one of us on this conversation. And she's in every one of the people who are listening. She's in us all. Whether you can dig down and find her is another story. And usually the place where you find that grit and that determination and that I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway
And
is when
see,
things are tough.
I see that in you with your approach to writing this book. Because Sarah Rickman, who has written some wonderful stuff, and I get at each other all the time about the term creative nonfiction. And it just
Like Vanity
it
Fair
makes me
self-publishing. Go ahead,
crazy.
girl.
But what you did in writing a novel, the research and the background that you have of the actions, of the time, of the approach, of the cultural outlook is as much like an approach to writing a book of nonfiction. It's such a mixture of things. This book may have the term novel on the front, but that's not what it reads like. It is just one of the most lyrically written pieces of history that I've ever seen.
And
Well, you, Jackie,
if I can build on the analogy that you began, Carole, and to build off of what Jackie said, your book, the dress is the story of Bessie that you tell, but the hanger that dress hangs on is the deep, deep historical research you did
Absolutely.
and the accuracy, the historical accuracy, not just about her life, you going to France, you going to Texas and Oklahoma to research her life yourself, but the deep dive into the history of aviation and reading all of the newspapers, as we said. And that is the hanger your story hangs on, where, again, it's a novel, it's a work of fiction that is completely built on a foundation of nonfiction and historical truths. That's what makes this an amazing book.
so let me leave you guys with this because, first of all, let me share with this. Thank you for having me. Thank you for extending. Thank you. Just thank you. Thank you, Liz. Thank you for your early support. And thank you, Jackie, for your insight. And Jenny, thank you for your sisterhood. I'll leave you guys with this story. When I left Women in Aviation, some years later, Jenny and I were always roommates. And oh my God, look, I just put on my pin, which I'm going to send to all of you. I'm going to be slow with the mailing, but I'm going to put it on. It looks like the book. So I'm going to send it to you guys.
Yes,
But
please.
and Holt made the pin. Girl, I
Oh,
didn't have to
awesome.
go there and pay for the pin myself, the last pin. Oh my God. But I want to leave you guys with the story. So this was several years later. Jenny, I don't know. I'm going to say 6, 7 years later when I was at Women in Aviation, maybe longer than that. Anyway, I was leaving. I rented a car and it was somewhere in Texas. Was it Dallas or somewhere? I don't remember. Anyway, I rented a car and I was going to drive to Oklahoma. So I left at 4 in the morning because I was going to meet the people where Bessie went to college for one semester, Langston, Oklahoma. And I told my husband, because as you guys know my story, I was an executive for 20 years. I left. September 11th happened. I just finished flight school, so I left the industry for 14 years to have babies and raise my kids. By the time I got to United Express, my kids were in middle school, and I flight instructed for 14 years. So anyway, I was trying to get back to, yeah, maybe it was into that time period. Anyway, Jenny and I were in a room together, and Jenny said, "Now listen, before you go, make sure that do you have your batteries? Do you have a flashlight? It was the early days of cell phones. Is your cell phone charged? Because I don't want you on that road by yourself." And so some of that seeped into the novel about being on the road by yourself. And I remember kind of creeping out the room at 3:30 a.m. because I wanted to get to the rental car because I wanted to get down there. And so all of that makes it into the book. And that sisterhood, that friendship, it makes itself into the book. And there's a woman named Norma who's Bessie's counterweight. And in many ways, I'll leave you guys because it's so important to sisterhood and friendship. In many ways, Bessie's counterweight, Norma, is what also gives the book heft because while Bessie's adventurous, she's very quiet, right? Today we would call her a little bit of a couch potato, kind of, but she's also an entrepreneur. And so she is the exact opposite, and yet at her integral, her core values, she's the same as Bessie. So I'll leave you with Norma being a best friend. And in Jenny, I found as much counterweight as similarity. Um, and so this amalgam of Black women was an amalgam of sisters I met along the way. And again, Jackie, to your point, I was able to share the history, right, of women and what women went through, specifically Black women, specifically women of that period. And so Norma takes on that role to kind of flesh out anything that I couldn't quite get into Bessie's history. So thank you all for reading once, for reading twice, for reading many times. I love you guys. The experience of having your sisterhood, all three of you, I thank you for that. I'm very
Oh,
grateful.
Well, we're
absolutely.
grateful too, Carole. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing Bessie to life for all of us in your beautiful novel, A Pair of Wings.
I love you guys. Ciao.
Good luck. We'll talk to you soon.
And bye, guys. Ciao. Ciao.
Bye. Well, so what a treat it
Oh,
was to have Carole join us.
absolutely.
That was so wonderful. And to hear from her perspective, I thought you hit it on the head there, Jackie, with the whole fiction thing. I told her this when I interviewed her last time, and I wrote about it this weekend in a post. Just the fact that I felt like I was revisiting an old friend by revisiting this book because she had done such a good job of bringing her to life in my mind. So I loved that you pointed that out. Now we all have some favorite quotes, and so Jackie, why don't we just start with yours?
And not really a quote, but it's the first sentence after the beginning poem. It's the engine spit once, and then, like a ruptured heart, my Curtiss OX-5 engine burst, spewing hot oil from both sides of its chest. I think it simply is, and either the most violently beautiful or the most beautifully violent thing I've ever seen written about an engine failure. And it just it hit me in the chest, and it was one of those deep breaths and then continue reading. It just, Carole's writing is absolutely beautiful.
And Jenny, how about you?
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention earlier in the talk, and so I'll say it now, is that a lot of people might not realize until they read the book and really learn more about Bessie Coleman, because people often just know a couple of touch points, how much she trained as a pilot and who she trained with.
Right.
I mean, dogfighters, and I mean aces from World War I, the Great War. She trained with the top pilots of the day in Europe.
Yeah.
And so her skill level is extraordinary. And again, you might not be aware of that until you read this book and really get the details of that. And again, this isn't fiction. This is real, that Carole's research. But the excerpt that I wanted to read is a little bit longer than Jackie's, is after she has reestablished herself, just beginning to reestablish herself as an air show pilot after her first accident, which was in 1923. And this is when she's back in Texas, and now she's performing an air show at her hometown of Waxahachie. And in the audience is the governor of Texas. I climbed up on the wing mount and waved to robust applause. I did my usual routine: loops, spins, turns, a figure eight, and a real low flyover. Then I used my platform in the sky to deliver a message. Taking a case of castor oil, I drizzled it over the hot manifold. Skywriting was difficult. Like writing on a mirror, you had to write backward and upside down. But I had practiced this by walking out my message in the dirt before flying it. Robert had taught me this technique. I had it straight now. Be brave. Never crawl. Fly. Many in Waxahachie were still illiterate, but there were bound to be enough readers scattered throughout the crowd to spread my gospel. Thunderous applause erupted from the colored section as my message was slowly revealed. Then, with my signature flyover, I sprinkled Norma's scarves over the side. They floated through the air, and people dove and howled, catching streamers right out of the air. I looped and dead-sticked the landing. In the end, stretched across 20 miles of sky, my defiant phrase hung there just as I had pictured it. Every time one of those bigots looked up into the sky to gauge the weather before planting a single cotton seed, I wanted them to remember me. And every time a child had to pick cotton in those same fields, I wanted that child to think about what they could someday become.
Wonderful.
That is just so profound and representative of kind of a whole bunch of things that we are all continuing to carry on.
And Bessie, this was representative in encapsulation of Bessie's life and Carole's life. Yeah. It wasn't just about the flying. It wasn't just about being a performer and, of course, flying, but it was about a message and being a role model and a message that you could become something else.
And it's a great segue to my favorite quote, which is actually from Carole's acknowledgments. So it is the last paragraph on the last page. I'm not spoiling anything of the story by saying this. These are Carole's words. She says, Bessie Coleman walked this earth before me and forged a path for me so that I in turn can forge a path for others. Long live Coleman, the sylph who inspired a movement. We who follow in her mighty wake are the granddaughters of her powerful dream. And Carole uses the word sylph earlier in the book with Mrs. Ethel Waters when she is presenting an award to Bessie. And I looked it up she defines it in her comments as well. But a sylph is a mythological air spirit, a supernatural being that inhabits the air and is associated with the element of air. So I just absolutely love this book. I know it's a little bit of a departure from what we've been doing, but I think we covered this in our conversation, how she fits into the context of the times that we've kind of immersed ourselves in with the other books that we've talked about. Do we have anything else to say about Bessie, Carole, or A Pair of Wings before we talk about what we're going to do next?
What an honor to be able to read this book and to be able to discuss it with Carole herself and hear in her own words. It's just fabulous to be here with all of you. Thank you.
I agree. So, what's next? The next book that we're going to do is Alone in the Sky by Jean Batten. This book is a 1978 publication, but in the blurb it says the book is based on her earlier work, My Life, published in 1938, and it has been thoroughly revised and lengthened by the author without losing its period feel. So I look forward to doing this book with you guys next. Do you guys have anything to say about Jean Batten?
So I can't get details right, but I will say Jean Batten is the preeminent pioneering woman pilot of New Zealand, widely revered throughout the world, but especially in New Zealand. You'll find many statues and references to her. And she did these amazing cross-country solo flights from Australia and New Zealand all the way across through Africa to England and then back. And she's just got an amazing story. She's an incredible woman. And so I'm really looking forward to talking about this book.
Me too. Well, thank you, ladies. This was really special. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely.
And